All right, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us. Today's meeting is to share information about RAPTR, and we are excited to have you join us and excited to have the team share about their progress. As we get started, I just want to very quickly remind everyone in terms of remote participation. This is an informational meeting, so it meant to primarily share information with all of you, and we'll have limited time for questions and comments at the end. So you can use the Q&A panel throughout the meeting if you want to add questions or comments for the team. At the end, as time allows, we want to encourage you to use the hand raise function and ask or make a comment in person. And whatever questions and comments we don't get to address during the hour that we have together, we will summarize and share with the team so they can address and consider. And just to introduce myself, I'm Maureen Kalman. I'm a facilitator with Sac State Consensus and Collaboration Program. With me today is my colleague, Julia Van Horn, who's going to be tracking our conversations and your questions and comments. And as we get started, I'd like to invite Amanda Martin, who is the Deputy Assistant Secretary for Administration and Finance with California Natural Resource Agency. In addition to that, in addition to her finance-related duties, Ms. Martin oversees the monitoring and stewardship unit that is developing the Resources Agency project tracking and reporting system that we will be sharing information about today. So I want to invite you, Amanda, to just provide us some welcoming remarks as we get started.
Of course. So good afternoon, and thank you for joining us for this wrap-up session. You know, in preparing for today, I looked back at my notes from the kickoff, and we talked about the billions in bond funding passed by the voters over the past decade, and about two parallel efforts. One effort to develop the RAPTR system, and the other to help define what elements or metrics should be included in a monitoring program over the long term. What metrics should form a baseline of comparison, evaluation, and improvement. Now, while this effort of developing metrics is still underway, even amidst challenging and changing scientific information and political priorities, it's going to take a bit more time and engagement. Fortunately, the RAPTR system is ready for its first flight. Now, a few weeks ago, the team you're going to hear from presented the RAPTR system and its features to Secretary Crowfoot. Now, if you have ever been in a meeting or a webinar with the Secretary, you know the energy and excitement he brings to his work. He and his executive team were very excited about what we have developed, as well as the improvements that we are planning for in the near future. He sees the potential of this system and is ready for us to jump in with both feet. But the process change can take many forms. Change can be like ripping a Band-Aid off. You know, full force, just do it, sink or swim. Sometimes that's the only option. Or you can approach change in phases, taking it step by step, taking feedback and making course corrections. The latter is what this team has done and will continue to do with RAPTR. You'll even hear about a few of the changes we made in the materials today. But given the urgency of the climate crisis, we need to keep moving forward, embracing uncomfortable process changes and celebrating success of our programs and projects and their positive impact on the world around us. We're still thinking big, looking forward to really analyzing the outcomes of individual projects across an entire landscape, but we'll continue to take baby steps to get there. And we'll have to adapt as new requirements are thrown at us. In 2018, Prop 68 was passed by the voters, and it required that entities administering those funds measure or require measurement of greenhouse gas emission reductions and carbon sequestrations for associated projects that got Prop 68 funding. Now, 4 years earlier, Proposition 1 passed, but didn't include any requirements regarding greenhouse gas emissions, even though both bond funds funded some of the same programs. So why not? Because it wasn't a thing. It wasn't a key area of interest back then. Science evolved, policymakers changed priorities, and project implementers, like many of you, are constantly being asked to adapt. We are excited to partner with you and support you and your projects through these efforts. I personally Look forward to the day when I can avoid sending out an urgent request for feedback, those control agency fire drills, as we call them, and just run a report out of the system to answer a question of, okay, how many projects were funded from the 21-22 wildfire funding? Or when the secretary or a member of the legislature asks, so what projects do we have in, say, San Diego County that deal with wetlands? We can give them an answer without calling 5 to 10 different departments to ask. Secretary Crofut loves to amplify and spread the word about all the progress and great work that y'all are doing, by the way. Seriously, he loves to hear about it and share with others. And on that note, I want to take just a moment to share how grateful I am for the MSU team and our IT program staff that have been involved in this effort. Brad Waros bringing his years of state experience to how things are done in the real world of the state. Jim Falter for being the environmental scientist who also speaks IT and serves as a vital bridge between those two worlds. Our former team member, Aaliyah Becker-Lowe, queen of coordination. And our newest team member, Katie Mulligan, who has only been with us a short while, but will help serve as CNRA's super user for RAPTR. And lastly, Gina Ford, who not only keeps everything running on time, like a master air traffic controller, but is the kind of manager who will wade into the thick of things right alongside her team, not only to get the job done, but it done well. Thank you all for your efforts over the past 2 years, for those of you watching who have collaborated with them, and to your commitment to the big picture that is the mission of the Natural Resources Agency, our entities and partners. Onward. Ori, back to you.
Great, thank you. Amanda, thanks for really setting up the vision for the future of what it could look like with a fully functioning RAPTR. And I hope all of you are just as excited as we are to kind of hear about it and think through the opportunities that the system is going to present. So I'm just very quickly going to just share with you our agenda for our together. As you will see, the MSU team will provide 3 presentations, starting with background and vision, expanding on what we just heard, and then we'll hear about best management practices and integrating RAPTR to support data collection and management. And then our 3rd presentation is a walkthrough through the system. So it gives you a glimpse into what that system is shaping to be. And then, of course, at the end, we've set up, as you can see on the agenda, for some time for Q&A. We'll wrap up with next steps of what's to come for the team and the work on RAPTR, and we'll end at 2 p.m. And again, just want to reiterate, because we are focusing on these presentations first and may have limited time for Q&A, please continue and use the chat, the Q&A panel to add questions and comments. We want to make sure that we're taking advantage of what Zoom provides us by way of interacting with each other. So with that, I'd like to introduce to you our first presenter is Gina Ford. And just to say that the Monitoring and Stewardship Unit has a mission to track and assess the outcomes of natural resources projects using performance-based criteria to inform California's investments in communities and nature. Gina joined the MSU team in August of 2018 as a unit supervisor. And as a supervisory scientist, Gina sets strategic goals to achieve MSU's mission of tracking and assessing the outcomes of resources-related projects. And with that, I'll turn it over to you, Gina.
Thank you, Ari. Good afternoon, everyone. And thank you for joining us for this webinar. I'm going to go ahead and get us started with about 4 to 5 minutes worth of a refresher regarding our background. And then we'll move forward into talking a little bit about vision for RAPTR, and then give you some new info on where that all stands as we speak. Next slide. So the purpose of the Monitoring and Stewardship Unit, which we generally refer to as the MSU, has been to provide recommendations on how to coordinate project and information sharing across all of the CNRA offices. Next slide. Our goals that align with that purpose are to 1, support better means of information sharing, 2, to promote consistency in information that's retained, 3, to compile information in a centralized and easily accessible way. And of course, 4, to inform decision-making and adaptive management. Next slide. Our findings have shown that we definitely have some work ahead of us to achieve all of those goals. The main findings can be summarized by saying that information management on projects has varied widely across all of our departments, boards, conservancies, and councils underneath agency. And there was no central access point of information for everyone to get their information about what was being done or how it's been done. And the individual offices were definitely staff poor to be able to manage monitoring over long-term periods of time on projects, as well as we were definitely limited on the ability to analyze the general return on investment for project work unless we did it on an individual case-by-case basis. Next slide. As you would imagine, it made sense to recommend that the development of RAPTR happen, which is where we are today. And we did that so that we would have a centralized tracking and reporting system. We also realized it would be important to make sure that our team paid attention in the development process and gave some thought towards development of standard protocols for data collection, as well as being able to provide training, and then of course to leverage other systems and reduce data entry that might be redundant through other systems. Next slide. The way that we've gone about doing this is by focusing first on the development. This slide is addressing some key recommendations for the system that we took into consideration during development. I'll let you go ahead and just read those and just say the MSU is now moving into the implementation and use of RAPTR in collaboration with you all. Of course, this will be done a few at a time with just our state workforce at first, not reaching out yet to the grantees or the general public, and then moving forward from there. Next slide. So our collaboration has shown up through largely through a series of workshops that we've done, which is now ending today in this sort of final report out. That's what this webinar is all about, is letting you guys know where we've landed. So our workshops were focused around general types of projects, but now this is just sort of the culmination of all of that here today. Next slide. In those workshops, we definitely heard a suite of benefits that were often mentioned in those conversations, and this slide tries to convey those that were heard most often. And the key is really just to look at the categories as they're grouped. So you have an improvement of effectiveness, an increase of transparency, a better information, ability to gather information towards decision making, in a way to enhance efficiencies, improve the amount of science that's involved, as well as enhancing our collaboration between each other and outside entities. Next slide. Of course, the workshops also gave us a chance to hear your concerns, and those are generally captured here. Please do note that we know that there were less concerns mentioned than overall benefits, and that's a great thing for us, but that doesn't mean that we take these concerns to be any less important. So we've done our very best to address them. We'll continue to do that. We'll continue to refine and modify the system over time, and hopefully keep these concerns forefront and also keep them dealt with and remedied. Funding and staff time, of course, are going to be concerns that we'll have, that will show themselves, and whether or not we have need for more staff or more funding, what have you, and we'll deal with those things as time moves by. We want you to understand that we do hear you on all of this, and we're trying our best to lend support there. In fact, you're going to be hearing from Brad Worrells on my team a little after me, and he'll be discussing some ways that we've been trying to lend some support through best management practices and procedures that might be good to employ. So we're going to continue to try to address these concerns as best we can throughout the process. Please do let us know when you have them. Next slide. So looping back to process, let's discuss what's happening as we begin onboarding of our offices into the use of this RAPTR system. We'll need to start developing working groups sort of concurrent to this to discuss metrics for long-term post-project completion monitoring, otherwise known as performance monitoring metrics. We want to start that later this year, and we hope to continue that through 2023 and likely beyond, because that's probably going to be something that we continue to evolve through practice and learning. Next slide. The metrics that we choose for evaluating performance and to overall monitor the projects that we are putting into effect are important and need to reflect the values and the priorities that we each work with. So what you see on the slide here is the mission statement for Resources Agency, as well as the various initiatives that we have forefront and are posted on our webpage as an example of values and priorities. But we realize that many of the departments that we work with have their own, and we definitely want to take that into consideration. Next slide. Metrics for performance of projects should also allow us to better address various levels of management related questions. So in order to inform project level management, which you see at the bottom of the slide there, we would have to take into consideration things about the project objectives and goals and get information on that collected. And all the way at the top of the slide, you see things that would help to inform state or agency level management decisions. And for those, it would be things about various funding sources or state plans or mission statements. And all of that is taken into account with the way that we have designed the system. And we would hope to be able to pull information out that would help support these kinds of processes. Next slide. That all said, what we expect to have in the near term from RAPTR is that it will function for project management, grant application acceptance and review, document storage, there will be a GIS viewer, and of course, some basic monitoring initially. All this will help us with streamlining processes as well as make it easier for information access and reporting. Next slide. In the future, there are so many options for where this can go, and it's really exciting. Of course, we hope to be able to soon add additional advanced GIS features. We are already looking into potential interfacing with other state systems. And if you can imagine, at some point down the road, this is going to allow for much easier collaboration, easier analysis about where we are, where we've been, and help us generally tell the story of our work. Next slide. I also want to take the time here to remind you that, as Amanda referenced about change process and pulling a Band-Aid off fast or moving step by step through a process, whichever way it's approached, and in this case, it's been step by step, I want you guys to see that we're at the cusp of moving into the integration of use of this system. So you're almost to the top of that hill where the view is going to be so much better. Next slide. So this is a good chance to lay out the basic near-term timeline with a caveat that I want you all to understand we are managing this whole process very much in the spirit of adaptive management. And that said, we are soft launching the system next week. So 3 of our offices under agency, the Department of Conservation, the Sacramento San Joaquin Delta Conservancy, and of course, our own agency office of the Secretary will begin using the system next week. We anticipate the next group should be coming online somewhere this fall. I can't give you an exact date because it's really hard to be able to put that down on the calendar because we need to see how much time the first group needs. And then we anticipate shortly after that, every 2 to 3 months, we'll be onboarding additional groups. Of course, there's no crystal ball, but I'm hoping that we have everyone onboarded by the end of 2023. That would be great. So with that, I will go ahead and pass the mic back over to Ari, and we'll move through the rest of the presentations. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Gina. Thanks for going through the kind of the whole process and timeline. And our next speaker is Brad Juarez, who joined the MSU team in 2018 as an environmental scientist to develop tools and best management practices for grant managers and administrators. And Brad is going to talk about best management practices and procedures as it relates to RAPTR and all about collecting data and managing data. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Brad.
Okay, thank you, Ari. Thank you, Gina. I want to start by saying to those of you who may have attended our RAPTR workshops in 2020 and 2020, I keep hearing a recording in progress in my ear. I don't know what's going on. Anyway, thank you for your patience and sticking with us. Things are beginning to take shape. If you didn't get to attend our workshops, that's okay. We're glad you're here today and hope to answer any questions you have. One of the projects the Monitoring and Stewardship Unit has been working on in preparation of and complementary to RAPTR is a best management practices or procedures manual for grant management. As we begin the gradual process of transitioning into RAPTR, now would be a good time to think about updating your own BMPs or procedures manual. For practical reasons, it's broken down into 2 volumes. What you're seeing is the first volume regarding application process. This document is designed to assist with launching a new program or restarting an existing program. It takes the reader up to the point recommendations for funding are made and the award letter is issued to the grantee. We are currently updating the second half of the BMPs, which provides a roadmap for managing live grant through implementation, closeout, and post-project monitoring, which I'll return to in just a moment. But what are some of the benefits of a best management practice or procedures manual? Improved efficiency and workflow to assist the grant administrator with most aspects of grant management. As most of you probably know, each project and grantee is unique, and each will invariably present circumstances specific to the project. Thus, this manual is a framework for grant administration meant to guide program managers and staff through the process, not necessarily dictate every action. Improving work, project management skills and promoting consistent high quality work product. Training new personnel. As new hires join your team, their experience with administering state grants may vary considerably. A procedures manual can help new grant administrators, and frankly, even seasoned grant administrators, navigate a new or unfamiliar process. We've heard managers tell us that they've had audit findings regarding their current programs, and in some cases having difficulty getting grant agreements executed. A procedures manual based on BMPs can definitely help departments in these key areas. And finally, it helps to build confidence in a grant administrator's ability to problem solve and can help to increase job satisfaction. Next slide. As I mentioned, the Natural Resource Agency's BMPs are broken down into 2 volumes. Informally, the application process, which you saw on the previous slide, and grant administration, which is in the process of getting a midlife boost. And I want to be perfectly clear here, you're not required to adopt the BMPs presented in the document. It is a resource that is available to you. You can adopt some or none of the ideas presented. If your current process serves you well, you're free to keep it. But if you're in the process of developing BMPs or revising your department's existing BMP document, as some have indicated, then the outline presented here is designed to give you some ideas to help you think through the process and give a sense of how it might look structurally. It's also one of the first things auditors ask about. Do you have a desk or procedures manual? Is staff work completed using similar methodology? The take-home message is that as we develop a standard set of metrics to evaluate project success, we want to eventually arrive at a set of standards with respect to project administration and reporting that is helpful to program managers and staff to complete their tasks and reduce duplicative work. If you have a chance to review the document, which will be made available soon on the MSU webpage, I believe, we would be interested in your feedback and input about how we can make it better. The document will continue to evolve as RAPTR fully fledges, particularly the section regarding application intake. Next slide. So before I hand the microphone over to my colleague, Jim, who will get into the details and features of RAPTR, my last slide is a brief segue into RAPTR, and I chose this slide for several reasons. Regarding templates from the previous slide, although they may not look quite like this, In time, RAPTR will provide a place to store the templates you currently use for project administration, such as grant agreements, escrow instructions, initial study, or notice of completion to complete your tasks. In addition, although project funding information today is typically stored in a spreadsheet or department managed database, RAPTR will store project data to help us answer management questions like how well the state is leveraging other local, state, federal, and nonprofit resources across state agencies, and whether this is more or less in line with our projections. Do we have projections? The other point I want to emphasize is the importance of collaboration across agencies and organizations to implement our various state plans. And you can see the list of organizations there. There is an opportunity, and it is my hope that RAPTR will promote open communication between agencies to share resources and knowledge, empowering us to think big on multi-objective projects that advance multiple state plans. And so what you're looking at is the final funding summary for a project titled Dos Rios Ranch, which is in Stanislaus County, adjacent to the San Joaquin River National Wildlife Refuge, and where the Tuolumne, San Joaquin, and Stanislaus rivers join. It was an acquisition in 2012 that became a floodplain and wildlife habitat restoration project, that became a groundwater recharge site, that became our newest state park. As we've seen many times in the work that we do, nothing happens alone. And with that, I will yield the microphone back to you, Ori.
Great, thanks, thanks, Brad, for your presentation and sharing about how RAPTR could feed in and coordinate with some of the requirements that you've outlined. And we're moving to to hear a presentation that would provide a peek into how and what RAPTR looks like. We have Jim Falter, who joined the MSU team in July of 2019 as an environmental and data scientist to help manage the acquisition, organization, and analysis of data pertinent to the stewardship of natural resource assets. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Jim, to show us what it all looks like.
All right. Thank you very much, Ori. The first thing I'd like to say is that some of the people present today will already be familiar with the overall design of RAPTR because they contributed to testing the initial build of RAPTR just before the new year. Others with us today might be seeing a working version of RAPTR for the first time. And since we have a mixed audience, I'm going to give a quick overview of how RAPTR works from start to finish. So I apologize if what I'm showing today is already familiar to some of you. Next slide. Now, first and foremost, RAPTR is a tool that will help program staff accomplish two things. One, manage the solicitation, intake, review, and awarding of submitted proposals. And two, manage the implementation of an individual project from start to completion. Next slide. However, as Gina mentioned earlier, the primary motivation for developing RAPTR is to aggregate and analyze the activities and outcomes of all projects implemented under the Natural Resources Agency, so that we can better demonstrate to the public all the actions the state is taking to protect and conserve California's natural resources. Next slide. The first step in the proposal intake process is to create a web-based form that prospective grantees will use to submit their proposals to the RAPTR system. RAPTR comes equipped with a special editor to help program staff create online proposal submission forms that will import two important types of project information. The first type is generic machine-readable data covering the core attributes of a typical grant application, such as a project title, project description, recipient organization, and amount requested. And this data can then be used to initiate the creation of a formal project in RAPTR if a submitted proposal is successfully awarded. Next slide. The second type of project information is data contained in forms and attachments that are custom designed to suit the specific requirements of a given funding program. These documents are collected during the proposal submission process and can later be downloaded by program staff or technical reviewers in a single zip file. And these documents can be any file type, such as Word, Excel, PDF, JPEG, etc. Now, originally, we intended that RAPTR collect some of the more nuanced proposal data through customized online forms rather than as attachments. However, based upon user experience and feedback, we decided it would be best if RAPTR collected proposed information as either simple machine readable data or as nuanced data embedded in attached customized forms. Next slide. One of the benefits of providing a common online proposal submission process in a centralized system like RAPTR is that it will provide greater consistency and familiarity for grantees who are applying for funding from more than one funding program and from more than one department. Another key benefit of centralizing this process, which I'll hit again later, is that we can automate certain data delivery requirements, such as the posting of grant solicitations on the state grants portal and fulfillment of AB 2252, as well as the posting of awarded grant data on the same site and fulfillment of AB 132. This last step illustrates another key motivation for developing RAPTR, to reduce redundant data entry and in turn improve the overall QA/QC involved in managing project data. Next slide. Once a proposal is submitted, it's then subject to administrative review to ensure that it meets certain predefined eligibility criteria. For funding programs that do not require an external review, senior program staff at this point have the option of approving or rejecting the application. For funding programs that require an external review, the program manager can instead assign each proposal to be reviewed by technical reviewers who themselves are also registered RAPTR users. Next slide. The assigned technical reviewers can then log on to RAPTR and assign scores based on each of the scoring criteria established for that particular funding scheme. They can also add some written comments providing their overall thoughts on the quality of the proposed work and its pertinence to the overall objectives of the funding effort. Next slide. Once program staff have reviewed the scores and comments provided by technical reviewers, they can then decide whether to award the proposed project, or in some cases, conditionally award the proposed project. That is, provide funding to support the project if and only if certain a priori conditional provisions are met. Once a proposal has been successfully awarded, RAPTR immediately creates a new project based on the core project data submitted in the proposal and provides templates that program staff can use to write the corresponding award letters and grant agreements. Next slide. This is a screenshot of the MADE project management dashboard where program staff will perform and record the common management functions involved in project administration. These core management functions are represented by each of the tabs displayed along the midsection of the dashboard. However, before I get to that, I'd like to first talk more about the data that defines the identity and attributes of a given project. The project summary pane at the top of the dashboard shows the data defining the core attributes of the project: the unique project reference number, the title of the project, the organization receiving the funds, the amount of funds awarded, and the current status of project implementation. The project summary pane is meant to provide users with a quick overall view of what the project is and what stage of development it's in. However, there is obviously a lot more project data that program staff would like to track. In fact, one of the most common suggestions received following the initial user testing was that RAPTR track even more project data than originally designed for. Consequently, we have added a number of new project management variables for RAPTR to track. At this point, I'd like to point out one other important change we made since completing the initial user testing, and that's the ability to create a project in RAPTR without having to import data from an awarded proposal. This was so program staff could create projects that were not originated as awarded grant proposals. This includes projects such as contracts for which DGS handles the competitive solicitation process, or projects that are originated and implemented by departmental programs themselves. Next slide. The project details page is where program staff can define or edit a wide variety of project attributes, including some of those shown on the project management dashboard. Some of these attributes include an overall description of the project, the person from the recipient organization responsible for supervising the work, where the project is taking place, and when the project is expected to be completed. Finally, and perhaps most importantly, the project details page provides a place where the contract or grant agreement formally defining the agreed upon scope of work can be saved and accessed for future reference, along with any subsequent amendments made thereafter. Next slide. I want to return to the project management dashboard to go over the core management functions that are shown in each of the tabs here along the bottom, or I should say along the midsection, starting with the funding tab. The funding tab was originally designed as kind of a limited interface for recording project data germane to the requirements of ABCRS, or the Agency Bond Consolidation Reporting System. However, towards the end of the development process, we received a number of requests that RAPTR be capable of servicing projects that are not bond funded sooner rather than later. Consequently, we decided several months ago that it would be best for the design and structure of RAPTR and ABCRS that they both are a little less interwoven than originally intended. That being said, I would like to be very clear on the following 2 points. One, RAPTRs and ABCRs will still be very much sharing core project data to minimize redundant data entry by program staff managing bond-funded projects. And two, the ongoing development of RAPTR will neither inhibit nor curtail the full use and functionality of ABCRs. RAPTR is not replacing ABCRs, and ABCRs is definitely not going away. The funding tab is now really more like an external funding tab, since it's designed for program staff to record all the sources of funding supporting a project external to their program, such as funds from federal programs, local governments, NGOs, and private individuals. This tells the agency which organizations we are co-sponsoring or leveraging our investments with, as Brad highlighted earlier in the wonderful example of the $26 million Dos Rios restoration. Underneath the funding tab is a data table listing the key attributes of a generic funding source, the name and type of organization providing the funding, the amount of support given, and the date the support was given. External funding sources are added to this list or edited by clicking on the green Add New button at the upper right of the summary data table, and that takes the users to the Edit Fundings page. Next slide. The Edit Fundings page is where each of the parameters shown on the summary data table can be defined. Users are also welcome to go back and change these parameters at any time by clicking on the hyperlink name of the funding organization and redefine any of the funding parameters shown if data was, for whatever reason, entered in error. Next slide. The Deliverables tab is where program staff list all the deliverables a project is required to provide, as specified in the corresponding grant agreement or contract. The core attributes defining each deliverable are given by the columns in the summary data table. While the columns aren't exactly the same as those in the funding tab, you'll note that the look and functionality of the summary data table provided under the Deliverables tab is remarkably similar to that provided under the funding tab. This is not a coincidence. We tried to add as much parallel design structure to RAPTR as possible to hopefully make the overall experience of using RAPTR less idiosyncratic and more intuitive. Consequently, just like for the funding tab, program staff can add new deliverables to the table by clicking on the green Add New button at the upper right of the summary data table, which takes them to the Add Deliverable page. Next slide. The Edit Deliverable page is where attributes of a project deliverable, such as the type of deliverable it is, the date it's due, and a short description, are first defined at the start of a project. However, unlike the funding tab, each of the deliverables defined in this list are expected to be provided and verified over the course of project implementation. At the moment, RAPTR is designed for grantees and contractors to directly upload documents for program staff to review and determine whether they have provided adequate proof that a deliverable has been provided. However, as part of our approach to conducting a soft launch of RAPTR, we're going to ask that program staff and newly onboarded programs manage the uploading of grantee documents themselves until one, they are fully comfortable with using RAPTR for their own management purposes, and two, we've had a chance to add some essential guardrails enforcing what actions grantees can and cannot take within the RAPTR workspace. Next slide. I'm going to skip the project metrics tab for now, since as Gina pointed out, the definition of standard performance metrics for use across all agency programs and departments is an ongoing process. Instead, I'll move on to the progress reports tab, which is designed to help program staff, grantees, and contractors manage reporting on the state of project implementation. Again, similar to the design of the funding and deliverables tabs, the summary data table underneath the progress reports tab lists all the reports that will be or have been posted by grantees and contractors as specified in the corresponding grant agreement or contract. It also provides the dates the reports were due, the dates they were approved by program staff, and a status indicator showing whether the project is currently on schedule. Also similar to the design of the funding and deliverables tabs, users can simply click on the green Add New button at the upper right of the summary data table to get to the Edit Progress Report page. Next slide. The Edit Progress Report page allows users to create a new reporting requirement or edit the details of a submitted report, as well as provide some additional details such as a short description of what the report covers and approximately when and how much the next payment request will be. And I will be getting to the management payment requests in a moment. Similar to other project management features, the progress reports themselves can be uploaded to and downloaded from the attachment pane at the bottom of the page. We've also added a feature whereby grantees and contractors can make forecasts of their future cash needs so that the state can preemptively ensure that these funds are available when they are needed. Some of the participants in our initial user testing suggested that it would be more user-friendly if Raptor kept all financial tracking functionality within the same tab, such as a payment request tab. Now, we agree that there is some clear logic to organizing the tracking of project finances in this way, and we are definitely open to that kind of reorganization of future versions of Raptor. However, as most of the people watching this webinar know, future forecasts of grantee cash needs are generally provided in submitted progress reports, and we want to be very careful deciding when and how to deviate from this convention. Next slide. The payment request tab is where grantees and contractors can request reimbursement, ask for an advance, or make some other request for funds. We received a lot of very constructive feedback on the original design of this project management function. We've done our best to remodel it in a way that better matches up with the typical administrative workflow. The summary data table underneath the payment request tab shows the core attributes defining a payment request, including the type of request, the amount requested, and the date it was requested, the amount approved, and the current status of the payment request in question. Similar to the other project management features I've just showed, user can simply click on the green Add New button at the upper right of the summary data table to add or edit an individual payment request. Next slide. On the payment request details page, grantees and contractors can make different kinds of payment requests, and program staff can then track the progress of each of those requests as they are reviewed by departmental accounting divisions and the state controller's office. Now, I want to be very clear here that this feature in Raptor is only meant to track the submission, review, and approval of payment requests. Raptor is not designed to replace existing financial administrative software such as ABCRS or Fiscal. Instead, Raptor is designed to act like a digital notebook that helps program staff simply manage the processing of all the various payment requests that have been submitted to all the projects they manage to ensure that any fiduciary obligations the state has to grantees and contractors aren't getting lost in the shuffle. I would note here that how program staff utilize this functionality should be discussed with the accounting staff within the respective departments and then well documented. Now, I'm not going to go over all the financial details that Raptor is tracking here, but I will just point out a few key features such as the ubiquitous attachments page at the bottom of this page, where users can store the departmentally specific payment forms that grantees and contractors are required to submit in conjunction with their recorded invoices. One other feature we've added in response to feedback from the initial user testing was the ability for program staff to reconcile the payment of advances after grantees and contractors have submitted the invoices, documenting how those funds were ultimately spent. Next slide. Finally, the communication log tab is where program staff can keep a record of the correspondence they've had with project stakeholders, as well as record their own internal notes on how well or how poorly implementation of the project is going. Once again, a communication event, for lack of a better word, can be added by or edited by clicking on the green Add New button at the upper right of the summary data table. Next slide. This takes users to the Edit Communication Log page, where they can first specify the type of communication event they want to record, the date on which the communication occurred, a follow-up date to act on if necessary, and of course, a written summary of the communication itself. Once again, program staff are offered the ability to attach any documents that may be relevant to the communication in question in the ubiquitous attachment page at the bottom of the page. Next slide. One of the challenges of building a system like Raptor is figuring out how to structure data on the way in so that it meets certain security and data integrity criteria, and equally important, that it's flexible and extensible enough to support additional feature enhancements in the future. The good news is that once you have the data structured in an orthodox way, then it becomes fairly straightforward to create customized report outs that extract, package, and deliver stored data in response to a particular query. This screenshot is an example of a very simple report out showing the list of funded projects, what communities of interest they serve, such as disadvantaged communities, and when they are expected to be completed. Raptor users can further refine the list by applying filters limiting the data shown based on the recipient organization, the amount funded, or, for instance, whether or not the project involves California's tribal communities. Next slide. I realize that I've covered a lot of ground in a very short period of time, but my main intent today was to give you a broad overview of how Raptor can be used to manage a project from cradle to grave. To summarize some, but not all of the key features that Raptor offers is: 1, the ability to manage the solicitation intake of proposals; 2, the ability to manage the review, scoring, and awarding of proposals; and 3, the ability to manage core project management functions such as external funding sources and cost sharing, deliverables, and at some point metrics, progress reports and future cash needs, payment requests and project expenditures, and finally, communications and internal notes. Next slide. Unfortunately, I don't have time today to go over all the features that we have added and will add to RAPTR in response to feedback already provided to us from users testing RAPTR earlier this year. However, I'd like to highlight a few of these near-term features we'd like to include in upcoming versions of RAPTR, even as we shortly begin onboarding funding programs, as Gina outlined earlier. Some of these near-term features include tracking expenditures by budget category. We're currently in the process of developing a simple way to display the total amount of funds that have been expended by the project in real time, so the program staff can assess whether project spending is on or off the pace as indicated by the project scope of work. This kind of simple report out doesn't require any changes to be made to the current version of RAPTR as I've shown here. However, in the future, we would like to give program staff the ability to track expenditures by budget category, since we understand some programs want and need that kind of administrative granularity. But don't worry. If your program isn't interested in tracking expenditures by budget category, you won't have to. We'd also like RAPTR to handle a single project receiving simultaneous support from multiple programs. It's not uncommon in some cases for large projects to seek financial support from more than one agency funding program in more than one department. Future versions of RAPTR will allow project managers to independently manage the support their specific funding program is giving, while at the same time make it easier for these programs to coordinate their individual efforts and work collaboratively toward achieving the broader objectives of the entire projects. Breaking up complex projects. In other cases, it's possible for a single project funded by a single program to be so large and complex in its implementation that it is too cumbersome for a single project manager to handle by themselves. In these cases, we'd like RAPTR to be able to divide these larger projects into various component projects that could be individually managed by separate program staff. Similar to projects receiving funding from multiple programs, the overall progress made by the combined activities of each of these component projects could then be aggregated and displayed to senior management and program staff supporting the project. Finally, identifying and recording key project stakeholders. We had a number of requests after the initial user testing that RAPTR provide a simple contacts tab where program staff could record the identity and contact info of not just the key players involved in the project implementation, such as a project manager, program manager, and ground level project supervisor, but other key project stakeholders, such as other relevant state employees, employees of federal agencies, local government representatives, subcontractors, regulatory officials, lawyers, community leaders, tribal leaders, and the list likely goes on. Next slide. Finally, I would be remiss if I didn't point out one other functionality we'd like RAPTR to provide in the future: the ability to automate the delivery of project data to other thematically focused databases, rather than having program staff separately and manually re-enter project data in these same systems as is the prevailing status quo. This no doubt will require us to coordinate our ongoing developing efforts with the various data stewards responsible for building and maintaining these systems whose number and variety are growing as I speak. Regardless, providing RAPTR with this kind of capacity would help limit the administrative workload of program staff, while at the same time maximize their ability to comply with any data sharing requirements. And it just makes sense, because why carry a smartphone and then send your text by carrier pigeon? So with those parting thoughts, I'd like to wrap up this brief walkthrough of the RAPTR system, where it stands and where we think it's headed, and hand the talking stick back over to Arit and Gina to bring us through the rest of today's webinar. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Jim, for walking us through and going over the different pieces and the opportunities. I think your last slide also answered some of the questions that I've seen through the Q&A in terms of integration with other systems. We have just a couple of minutes, and I'm wondering if anyone wants to use the hand raise and provide a comment or question. I know, Gina, you have been responding to all the questions that have been coming through, and we'll include them in the summary for everyone to review. So I'm just going to pause and see if anyone wants to ask a question or make a comment in person. And I know we have here the MSU email if you want to reach out directly. So I see, Karen, you have a hand raised, so you should be able to speak now. Let's try it.
Can you hear me?
Yes, welcome.
Hi. Thank you so much. Let me introduce myself. My name is Karen Arias, and I'm actually the database and system engineer for the grant management system. I had practically been providing the maintenance for the OGL's office the past 14 years as a consultant, but I had just recently joined the state. And so I'm continuing to provide the data and system development for the grant management system for the OGL's office. And I just wanted to introduce myself and, if possible, probably contact you or whoever is, practically the project management for, the RAPTR, system, because I wanted to be able to discuss a little bit more the implementation. And because obviously I'm going to need to continue to provide the data management and support for the OGL's office. So I wanted to, introduce myself and just, contact whoever will be probably the best person, I guess, to verify, make sure what for the future. Obviously, we're going to probably need to collaborate. And so just wanted to, like I said, introduce myself and hopefully be able to have a separate discussion outside just to make sure.
Karen, hi, thanks for that. I really appreciate it. We've been working with Lee Butterfield at OGL's, and we're aware of the GMS. In fact, we used as a lot of discussion points when we were in our early development stages. So we will definitely reach out. We're not quite at the point where we're going to onboard state parks yet, but when we get to that, then we'll do a lot more of that collaborative engagement and conversations like you're speaking to. But if you have any questions or you want to talk a little bit further, I'm more than happy to meet with you anytime after next week, and we can just chat about all of this a little bit more. We should probably bring in Lee and a few others from parks as well when we do that.
Okay, perfect. So Gina, yeah, thank you so much. Like I said, I just wanted to introduce myself, but thank you for the time.
Absolutely.
So
Thank you.
Yeah, I'll reach out. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. And I think it's fair to say that the invitation is extended to other participants who want to reach out to the team with any additional questions or input. Brendan Pipkin, you should be able to speak now.
Great. Thank you all. This is a great presentation. Really exciting to see the RAPTR system get put together. And for our grant program, the Transformative Climate Communities program, we're particularly excited, I think, for the ability to break up complex projects that you spoke to towards the end, and that sort of ability to connect the many to one feature. And so I guess I was just wondering a little bit of clarity on maybe that timeline for next steps of how that interacts with the DOC's rollout, for example, and if or when there might be opportunities to see or to help test some of those features as they come about. Thanks again.
My attention got split because
No, I think I can answer that, Gina. I would just say I mentioned that explicitly because it's a high priority, and we've already kind of thought about conceptually how we're going to approach that problem, and it's going to solve basically the same sort of solution as two flavors or two variations. It'll solve two of the same problems. So the near future enhancements number 2 and 3, like multiple programs funding the same single project, or you have complex projects broken up, how we're going to handle that and the kind of hierarchical structure we're going to introduce to deal with that. We already have some ideas. We just need time to actually implement them. So I would say roughly time frame. It's hard to say because Gina's in charge of that, but 6 months, end of this year, early next year.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. And then I want to address Lauren's question in the Q&A. She asked, so she said, it looks like it was intended only or for primarily grant related projects. I'll pause there and say, no, it's meant for all project types. We're just simply starting with those that are grants at first. And you said, what about monitoring and reporting required for other purposes, compensatory mitigation and so on? So the permitting related requirements are still going to go through their normal channels in terms of reporting whatever monitoring you do in relation to a permit through those channels, because we can't quite interfere with something like that. So CDFW, for example, for their 1600 agreements, or the water board and all of those, you're still going to go through that normal process. However, if you're already monitoring things from a regulatory need, then those monitoring parameters that the metrics may plug right into RAPTR for metrics that we want to track overall to understand performance of the projects. So if that's the case, then great, you would also put that information in there. And so we do have plans to do long-term post-project completion performance related monitoring. And in my presentation, I was speaking to developing working groups on that so that we would have a way to decide on what those metrics need to be. And we'll probably need to do that similar to how we did with the workshops and break it up by project types. So things that relate to acquisitions and easements, or things that relate to recreational projects, restoration projects, so on. And there's their potential to use the system for applications going forward, like permitting and regulatory. It gets really, really complicated to try and track the whole regulatory process and applications and permits. So if that's what you were referring to, I'm not sure that this is the system for that. However, I would love to see someday a centralized state system for all the various regulatory processes. But if you're speaking about applications for grants, then yes, once the departments are on board using RAPTR, they would be using RAPTR for the grant applications for those types of projects. But if it's a directed action, you would just skip the application step and start in with putting the project in after that point.
Thanks, Gina. We're just about at the end of the hour, but I see a question from Luke Hunt that just maybe you can very quickly respond to. Luke writes, it sounds like RAPTR will be the new place for grant management, storing all of our deliverables, payment requests, amendments, etc. We currently manage our grants in SharePoint. Will there be some external support for migrating over?
So the intention is to start once your department onboards into use of RAPTR, you would start from a date forward. So you may have a legacy system that you're still operating within. You may still keep information in SharePoint. And that's been the established expectation at this point. If a given department wants to try and migrate information into the system, they could. However, it would be on them for staff time and so on at this point.
All right, thank you. I thought maybe others would be curious about that as well. And I'll just let you, Gina, wrap up and let everybody know what's next.
Awesome. So what's next? Next week, Jim will be having a very in-depth walkthrough with our onboarding departments, the 3 that are going first. And we're going to start learning as we go. It's a lot of adaptive management, as I said before. If any of you all are particularly interested in having your department start the process of onboarding sooner than later, please reach out to us and let us know. And in the meantime, if you just want to read a little bit more information, you can go to the link on this slide, the one that says RAPTR Facts and FAQs. It will give you a little bit more condensed one-pager version of information about this. And of course, there's our webpage. On the webpage, we will post this presentation in case anybody's missed it, as well as the slides, and there should be some sort of brief summary about it, and any additional materials that we come up with regarding RAPTR at some point will be posted there as well. So appreciate you all joining us today, and if you have any questions or comments, or you want to reach out to us, again, the invitation is open. Please reach out.
Thanks,
you,
everyone.
Gina. Yeah, and thank you, Jim and Brad, for your presentations, and looking forward to seeing what's next. And so thanks everyone for joining. Have a
Thank
good
you
day.
all.
Thank you.